Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sons of a Pitch Soccer Podcast. I am your co host, Mike Guglielmi, here with my fellow co host, Nick Pateras, and we have a special guest on the line, Duane Rollins from Soccer Today Podcast at 24th Minute on Twitter, here to talk some Toronto FC and preview their 2020 MLS season. Duane, welcome to Sons of a Pitch Soccer.
It's good to be here.
All right, so let's jump right into our content here. Toronto FC had a pretty lackluster offseason for their standards. Usually they do a lot more movement in than they did this season. This season, they only brought in four guys, starting with Rocco Romeo, a homegrown center back, midfielder Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy, as well as Jaden Nelson. All three of those guys, homegrown players, and then the number one signing of them all, the designated player, Pablo Piatti, transfer in from Espanyol over in La Liga. So not a ton of movement in, but they did have some movement out. Jay Chapman was traded to Inter Miami FC. We had Drew Moore go back to Colorado. Caleb Pedersen-Sewell option was declined. Ashton Morgan, the longtime TFC player, had his option declined, and he actually ended up at Real Salt Lake. Aiden Daniels, Ryan Telfer, John Baccaro also all had their options declined, and Nicholas Benazet, his loan expired, and he ended up going over to the Colorado Rapids. So that's the movement in and out. Duane, what are your thoughts on the movement for Toronto FC this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, the one move that doesn't show up there is Michael Bradley signing the extension, changing his deal from DP to TAM status. That's been a little overshadowed since the fact because he, of course, disclosed that he had an ankle injury at MLS Cup final that is keeping him out of the first half of the season. But that was probably the most significant move of the offseason in that it allowed them to go after another DP player, which they didn't sign until recently in Pablo Piatti. MLS has a rule. You can only have one Piatti at a time. So when one left, one came in. And they have to play in Canada, apparently. But nonetheless, it's Pablo Piatti is a significant signing if he's healthy. And I think that if you were going to put a tagline on TFC's season, it would be if they're healthy. Because this is really underlying everything they have to do. And you mentioned the three academy kids. That is a significant move in the sense that I think finally TFC is starting to bear some legitimate fruit out of that academy. This is a talent-rich area that has been really underperforming for decades. Part of that's the overall problems in the Canadian system, but TFC has found a way to sort of mine that for good young talent. They signed all the three of those are really young players. One's 15. So this is not a 2020 signing. This is a 2021, 22, 23 kind of look here, right? And they're protecting their assets. And I think that these kids really are going to be contributors into MLS or sold on even in the future. But they're not really moves for this year. This was all about moving Bradley to the DP status or to the TAM status, and then having the ability to bring in a wide dynamic offensive talent at another DP position, which is something that Greg Vanney has been calling for really since 2016. They have brought in some guys and developed some guys that have played a role there, but they have not had a true game changer on the wing. And this is, they believe, a guy that, if healthy, again, there's that term, can really be that player, can be a best 11 level player in MLS. And if they do get that, and if they stay healthy, TFC does look like they have a roster that can absolutely contend for MLS Cup again.
Agreed. Yeah, that was kind of my thought. Is it all boils down to the health, especially when you have Josie Altidore, and we all know his history with injuries. Really, what my number one concern is bringing in a second designated player that has been injury prone. Not really the best look. I mean, if we lose both of these guys, it could spell a lot of trouble. So I think you're spot on there, Duane. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, in the past, we've always praised Toronto FC for having such depth that they've been able to fill out the back end of their roster with players who can step up for a couple of games and perform at a high level. But then again, if you're doing it, it at 3 or 4 or 5 different positions over the course of the season, then yeah, that spells disaster. So yeah, agree with all of your guys' assessments on that. I don't want to say Toronto FC is off to reload because they've got a core group of players that can still compete with it, and they're I guess Toronto FC doesn't think they need to reload or restructure or whatever the case may be because they didn't make that many other moves coming in. But yeah, it looks like they can capture that MLS Cup run magic for at least another season, and hopefully for the Toronto FC fans out there, they do it.
Yeah, that's kind of the saving grace to me for the Pablo Piatti signing, because when that came through, I was like livid. Uh, and then once I heard a little bit more about the 1 year plus 1 year option, as well as the fact that he's at 1.6 million for the new CBA rules, that kind of brought a little bit. Made it a little bit easier to swallow from a TFC perspective. Some of the players out. As a diehard TFC fan, I hate to see Ashton Morgan go, but in a sense, for him personally, I think it might be a better fit out there in Real Salt Lake. Maybe he will get more playing time. Duane, what are your thoughts on some of the guys that have left with Benazet and Morgan specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I like anyone who has been in the stands at TFC since the beginning and saw Ashton Morgan from the time he was an academy grad all the way through till last season. Was sad to see him go, but I mean, if you take your fan hat off and sort of logically look at it, it makes sense on both parties. They have some younger players coming through the system that can probably fill that backup left back role, which is what Ashton was, at a cheaper price and offer a higher ceiling, right? I mean, Ashton Morgan is what he is at this point, and he's made a good career out of what he is, and I'm not dismissing him at all. 100 appearances in MLS. Apologize for the dog there. 100 appearances in MLS for a guy that I don't think anyone at the time thought was going to last for more than a couple years. So I will miss him. Benazet, look, he had a good run in the playoffs. He is a talented player. Whether or not he was a player that was going to be a difference maker over 34 games, I'm not convinced of. Piatti does have a higher ceiling for sure. So as much as I would have liked to keep him, I mean, the reality of MLS is it's a cap league, and you're going to have to make sacrifices like that from time to time. And, as I said, in an ideal world, you keep him. But, I mean, I would rather – I agree. I know where you're coming from with the Piatti position. It is a risk. It is a role, but I do actually like it in the sense that it is TFC betting on themselves and believing that they have the talent to win another championship, and that is ultimately what this is about. So I think that they have a better chance of doing that with a healthy Piatti than they do with Benazet, what we saw from last year. Although they did get 45 minutes away from doing it last year with them. So really, right. maybe I'm wrong, but time will tell, right?
Exactly. So speaking of those designated players, our designated player review for Toronto FC, the three DPs are Alejandro Pozuelo, Josie Altidore, and Pablo Piatti. So speaking of Piatti, 30 years old, left wing, it is TFC completely betting on themselves. If he stays healthy, if Josie stays healthy, this team can and probably will at least be in another MLS Cup and possibly even win it. So what I like about the group is you've got the attacking midfield in Pozuelo, who can also play forward. You've got the forward, and then you got a winger. You got those three DP pieces are attacking pieces. That is key. I think the teams that have the most success use that same model. Pozuelo, I can't wait to see what this guy will do with a complete offseason. When he transferred over at the beginning of the MLS season from Genk, he had played for, I don't know, was it something like 12 or 15 months straight, something like that. So to see this guy be able to put up 12 goals and 12 assists and 30 appearances last year, to come in with a fresh slate, I can only imagine what he'll be able to do, and I'm really excited about it.
I was just going to say, with Pozuelo, I started watching him in March of last year when the rumors started to go around. I was seeking out streams for Belgium, and immediately my mouth sort of fell open. And we were all a little raw back then because of the player that he not was replaced, well, in our minds was replacing in Sebastian Giovinco, of course. He's not that player, but but certainly he is a dynamic guy that really adds a lot, and is never going to be. He was always going to suffer a little bit in that comparison, and I don't know if TFC fans completely appreciate how good of a player he is yet. And with a full year, he was best 11 last year, but with a full year rest coming in, I think he is a massive piece to this team, and can be an absolute difference maker. This is a guy that is in his prime, could have went to a different league than MLS and chose to come here, and I think the TFC fans might, now that we're a year apart. And he had his famous quote on TSN. I don't know if he can swear in this podcast, but an F blank good team. He might have endeared himself a little bit more to the TFC fans, and hopefully they can appreciate what they have here. We saw glimpses of it last year, in particular his debut. Certainly the cojones that he showed to score the chip in the on the penalty and in the playoff game. There's a lot to like about that player, and I think that it's exciting to watch what he'll do this year.
Yeah, the one thing we always say about these recent signings who come in internationally is they can set the world on fire for their first 3 or 4 games just because of their talent and skill, but then they've got to adjust to the league. They've got to adjust to the travel, the style of play, the dog days of the MLS summer. Now that he's got a year under his belt, hopefully then he knows how to pace himself a little bit. But do you see anything like that, Duane, as far as international players coming in, that there is that significant adjustment period, or is this maybe just something that happens with certain players?
No, for sure. I mean, look, if you've listened to my show, you'll know that there's a saying that I put out and have for years. It's that MLS is simultaneously the most overrated and underrated league in the world. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people that want the league to be more than it is will hold it up higher than it is. But a lot of people don't realize how hard it is, how athletic it is, how demanding it is. And they just assume a guy is going to come in from a higher level and immediately dominate the entire year. The reality is there are a lot of weird things you have to deal with in a world footballing sense when you come into Major League Soccer, and a lot of it's the travel, the heat. I'm not sure players realize, like, they think, oh, I'm coming to Canada, it's going to be cold all year. Well, it's 40 degrees Celsius in summer here, right? And well, then you're going to Houston and it's 50 degrees Celsius. So all of that plays a role, and you have to get used to it, and not everyone adjusts. So it's absolutely not a matter of just looking at what league they came from and immediately assuming that they're going to be successful in this league. And certainly players have to have a drive, I think, to come in. And I TFC's choices on the DP front, I think, are better than the more glamour clubs. When I say glamour clubs, we're talking about your LAs and your New Yorks and your Miamis now, that are famous cities in the world. Toronto's not is no one city in the world, but I wouldn't call it a famous city in the world, right? So they don't attract the same type of players, but I think that has allowed TFC to attract a better type of DP, hungrier DPs that come in with a similar level skills than these older superstars, and have more of a drive to go through that. Because we see a lot of those older guys come in and just flop bluntly. I mean, it's rare. The Robbie Keanes are rare in this league. Most of those guys either perform at blank average, Zlatan kind of, or, well, I mean, Zlatan had moments of brilliance, but overall, I think you would just call it a signing average. Or they'd flop like a Gerrard or a, I don't know if Lampard did, but Pirlo for sure did, right? So I think it's an advantage to kind of not be as fancied of a location, because then you can afford to go after a Pozuelo rather than those guys.
Agreed. Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned, Miami being able to draw a certain kind of talent. I just had this thought that they're the best MLS team to never have played a game. Like, that's just kind of everything I'm hearing out of Miami right now. So Mike, why don't you round up the DPs then?
Yeah, so as well, Jozy Altidore, 11 goals and 7 assists in 22 appearances last season. We all know the story with Jozy, and we'll touch on that here in a second. Pablo Piatti and Alejandro Pozuelo, really a great core of DPs. Now, most important player for TFC this season, I'm going with Jozy Altidore. To me, and it really comes down to his health. If he can stay healthy, this team's going to be really good. If he's not healthy, forget it. It's going to change the way the season goes, because the striker depth for TFC is not great. Well, you got Patrick Mullins behind him. You know how we feel about Patrick Mullins. We've said some things on past episodes about him. Look, Jozy Altidore, since 2015 when he came to TFC, he's played 25, 23, 27, 13, and 22 games in a season. That number 27 was 2017 when TFC won the treble. So he needs to play a majority of the games. Is he going to play all 34? No, and I really hope he doesn't. I hope they kind of go with the load management type like they did with Kawhi and the Raptors with Josie. Magic number for me is 30 games in all competitions. If he can play that, then there's going to be some silverware in the future for Toronto FC. As far as striker depth goes, you got Patrick Mullins behind him, and then you've got some young kids as well. Possibly this Achara gentleman from Georgetown through preseason that's been pretty good. That's about it. So, Duane, what are your thoughts on most important player? Who would that be in your eyes for TFC this season?
Well, I mean, I got to agree that it's Josie. I thought Josie's the most important player on TFC's roster dating back to 2015. Even when Javinko was here, I always felt that Josie was the key from making them from being an excellent team to the best team. And certainly, it is my opinion that Josie Altidore almost single-handedly won the 2017 MLS Cup with his playoff form.
Right.
It's hard. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. But if he's healthy to start that Seattle game last year, perhaps we're talking about a second MLS Cup in 3 years, because he made a difference when he came on for the last 10 minutes, likely playing on one leg. Right. So yeah, he is a massive player. 1A, 1B to me in terms of the best striker in the league between him and Martinez. And I'll probably give the nod to Martinez in Atlanta because, he stays healthy. That's the bottom line here. And Josie just has been made of glass his whole career. Whether that's fixable at this stage, I don't know. But if they can keep him healthy and keep him peaked at the right time, and I do think that there is some evidence that the TFC is not really concerned about one part of that trouble. They won it once, and that might be enough. The Shield I'm talking about, because this is not a league that the Shield matters all that much. It's a nice day out when your supporters get to play around with the big plate, but it's not really what you're playing for. And TFC last year really managed the season quite well. They snuck up on people, but if you were paying attention from August 1st on, they shouldn't have snuck up on them in the playoffs. This was a veteran team that just was refusing to lose for the last third of the year. I suspect that they will try to emulate that again this year. So this means that they drop a few points in the first half of the season and sit third, fourth, fifth in the East for that part, because they're resting Josie, they're resting Piatti. I think they're going to be okay with that. Yeah, I agree. Now, I'm going to give one other or two other names to that. And actually, I'm going to make them a single name, and that is Mavinga and Gonzalez, because you talk about lack of depth up front. There's no lack of depth behind that center back position there. Now that Drew Moore has left, I mean, he was getting long in the legs anyway. Salon, I don't know if you had watched the LA friendly highlights. He was standing in quicksand again on the goal. Do we want to talk about Zavaleta? I mean, I wish him well, but there's not a lot of evidence he's going to suddenly change his form. Rocco Romero, he was a kid, like who's going to back up those guys if one of those two guys get hurt? So that's where I put a second look. But yeah, Josie's the guy.
I'm glad you think so too, because Mike is such a Josie fan. Sometimes I wonder if the red that he bleeds for Toronto is clouding his judgment. I mean, he even named his dog Josie. That's how big of an Altidore fan my co-host here is. So I'm glad there's a little third-party independent verification of this.
There you go.
All right, so moving right along to the breakout youngsters. Trying to pick out some guys that could make a name for themselves here this season in 2020. The two guys that I'm kind of going with here is one for sure, and Liam Fraser. This guy's going into his third season now with the senior team. Has played in 10 and 9 games over the past 2 seasons. Really has a good chance to break out this season because of Michael Bradley's injury, and that he's probably going to get the nod to start all of those games until Bradley can get back. As well, Jaden Nelson, the 17-year-old winger that just signed to the homegrown contract. I had watched some games, some USL games, some Generation Adidas Cup games. This kid is special. He really has some talent. Whether or not he'll actually get on the field for TFC, that's really the only question that I have. But those are the two guys that I expect to break out, if any do, for TFC. What are your thoughts?
Well, Frazier is the obvious choice because he will get an opportunity with Michael Bradley's injury to probably fill in that role for the first part of the season here. we talked about look, take a giant grain of salt when you're talking about preseason, but this Achura guy, from what I can tell on replays on friendlies that we can't watch because they're blacked out. So this high scientific study, he seems to be doing well. So maybe that's more hope than speculation, though, right?
Right.
Look, Schaffelberg might have another good year. The wide players are going to be important. Even Endo, I think, could potentially. I don't know if you call Endo young anymore. He's been around a long time now. He's almost eligible for a permanent residency at this point. So it's not exactly a young guy, but a guy that has never really consistently played. So maybe he becomes a more consistent player, because I do think TFC is going to be a little bit more wide focused this year, and those guys might get a chance, because I do think they'll rotate them through quite a bit in the summer to try and again set up for a run in the fall.
Now, a projected starting 11 for TFC. I'm thinking the 4-3-3 for TFC. Seems to be what Vanny wants to go with. That's kind of been his preferred formation, is what he's trying to build the roster out for. Quentin Westberg in goal. That one's pretty standard. Justin Morrow, Mavinga Gonzalez, and Auro across the back line. I could go with Richie Larea there, starting at right back, but I kind of like having him come in kind of as that super sub role towards the end of the game. He seems to really break open down that wing, especially if you're pushing for a little bit of offense there. In the midfield, Osorio, Fraser, and Marky Delgado, and up front, Pozuelo, Altidore, and Piatti. I can't really see many changes to that, but Duane, you have more insight to TFC than I do. You got any changes to that projected 11?
De Leon is where you fit him in, but I think De Leon will be very much like Larea in the sense that these are guys that can add a spark on. I think De Leon could be a little more defensive cover too if he wants to sit back more. This is my one concern with the depth of the bench, is I don't see a lot of plugs in there on the defensive side of games to shut games down. And that was a problem with TFC last year. They have a lot of offensive weapons they can bring in. They don't have so many defensive stoppers that they can bring in, and that might be an area that they want to look at a little bit more. But no, your lineup's pretty good there. Delgado's the name I think that might get a few TFC fans frustrated. We need someone as a whipping boy in the city. Delgado has become that for some fans. I'm not sure why, but he has. Well, I know why. It's because he missed a goal in against
Chivas.
Guadalajara. So yeah. And it wasn't as much of a sitter as people remember. Go back and look at the replay. Yeah. He wasn't a sure thing. But at any rate, he's a very consistent player that is, I think probably going to be in that position when Bradley comes back. Obviously, you take Fraser out and you put him in. That's a pretty simple selection there. Look, there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of depth in the middle of the field. This is a very strong team in the middle. This is a team that has some depth issues at the back, in the middle, as I mentioned, and up front. Mullins, I don't hate him as much as others, but he's not a guy that's going to score a lot of goals. So you got to hope that you can stay healthy in those key positions, because otherwise you're plug and playing up there, and that's not necessarily the best case. But no, your lineup sounds about right. They're going to try and get the ball out wide. The Venezuelan kid too. Name escape.
Erickson Gallardo.
Gallardo, yeah. That's another name that I should have mentioned him earlier in terms of breakout. Mm-hmm. We don't think of him a lot because he kind of disappeared after he came last year. Had the injury, right. Didn't really start him immediately. So I don't really know what to think and what to hope for there. But if he's as good as they think he is, which, they hope he is, right. then yeah, you can maybe add him into the mix as well.
Okay. Awesome. Now, as far as salary goes, and of course the numbers haven't come out yet. They'll come out, after maybe about a third of the season goes through. But is there any room? Does TFC have any TAM left or GAM or whatever they're going to call it now after this new CBA? Do they have any room for more signings, or is this kind of what we've got now?
Yeah. Good question. I don't think there's much room there. If there was any more room for depth, I believe you would have seen them make signings that weren't from the academy to fill those depth positions out. I truly believe that. Look, it was a very confusing offseason in terms of getting a handle on how much money was out there, because we didn't know how much money there would be to spend. And now that we do, I still think that it's more likely that TFC will have to move something to get something, and that something would probably be Alex Bono if they could find a wanter for him. If there's an injury somewhere in the league early on for a starting keeper, I'm pretty sure that Ali Curtis will be on the phone dangling Mr. Bono's name out there. That's a lot of money for a backup keeper, and you might need to move him to have the chance to fill in a spot. And if they were going to bring another player in, if I anticipate the next question, or if it is, probably some more depth at center half is what I would look at. That's hard to find, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So predictions wise, ceiling and a floor we've been doing for each team. This one, as it's tough for me as a diehard TFC fan. I automatically want to say the ceiling is first in the conference, win everything again. But realistically speaking, I don't think that's the case. I think they can be close to that if all goes well. But I'm thinking for the ceiling, I'm thinking third overall in the Eastern Conference. As you said, with that load management type style, rest Josie a little bit, rest Piatti a little bit. They prioritize the playoffs, end up with a couple home games. Floor, I'm thinking probably just missing the playoffs. If all goes wrong, Josie Altidore gets hurt, he's out for 3/4 of the season. Piatti doesn't pan out, that kind of stuff. Then I'm thinking they'll miss the playoffs just barely. Nick, what are your thoughts on predictions?
Well, yeah, we talked about it throughout the whole course. It's how's your roster going to look? Is your starting 11 going to be able to carry the load, or are you going to have to rely on a lot of your depth players? So I think you're right. If everything completely collapses, if there is just utter chaos in the lineup, if Vanny starts getting desperate, because I think some people started calling for his job. It wasn't a very loud call, but it sounded like he was on the hot seat for a little bit over the last year or so. So if he starts getting desperate and tinkering with formations and using different players out of position and things like that, then yeah, the wheels could fall off of it. But absolutely, we know the potential, we know the core, and yeah, a trophy isn't unrealistic for this team.
In terms of a ceiling, look, I'm going to be more bullish. Honestly, the ceiling of TFC is champions. They're capable of it. In terms of the regular season, I agree, as I've said earlier, that I think that they'll probably manage it a little bit. So I suspect they'll be second or third in the East. The East is pretty weak, though. So their floor, I think it would take an extended injury for all three DPs at the same time for them to truly be around the bubble next year. I do. I mean, lots of strange things can happen in this league. So, but I think it's unlikely they would miss the playoffs. So I'll put their floor a little bit higher, and say it's fifth. That they're just below the playoff home game bubble. But first to fifth, and I truly think they are. I haven't come down on exactly who I'm going to pick to win MLS Cup yet on my show, but TFC is definitely rattling in my head as one of the options to pick.
Awesome. I'm with you. We'll be breaking out our predictions probably next week at some point. Right before the season, we'll do a little MLS season preview and give our predictions. So, Duane, thank you for coming on the show. Please tell our listeners where they can find you and what they should be looking out for.
You can follow me at 24th minute, 24th minute, after Danny Dichio's goal back in 2007. Been covering the team since 2008, so I was lucky enough to get that handle. So that's where to follow most of my stuff. Also follow at SPN Soccer Today, which is the show's handle. We are live Monday to Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern most days. Sometimes we have to adjust it here and there, but we are live on that Twitter feed, on our Facebook page, on YouTube, and on anywhere you can get your podcast on demand after that. We do 5 live shows a week free. We do several Patreon shows as well on the Sports Podcasting Network with my partner in crime, Kevin Laramee, which you can follow. I'll plug him to at Kev Laramee, Laramee. Give Kevin a follow too, and we'll get all the good work that we do at the Sports Podcasting Network.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Very much appreciated for you coming on. The first game for TFC this season is on Saturday, February 29th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time out in San Jose facing the Earthquakes. Should be a good game for that first game. So now thank you all for listening and watching our TFC preview for 2020, and we will talk to you guys soon.